The drink, we're clicking to the environment. We're clicking to the environment. We're drinking to the environment. Yes.
And we are back with the drink sustainability. The drink. With the legendary and awesome Will Heyniger. How you doing, buddy? Hanging in there still?
Yes, good to go, baby.
Sweet. Yo, let's do another little cheers to the environment and awesome sustainability shit. Beach House, thank you so much for a tall house porter. It's so great. Anyway, what's going on? Hey, I just got this 4-pack right before the show, so
nice.
Supporting local. Anyway, so this little segment, we are going to go into the whole Arctic Vortex that just swept across the United States, and our awesome guest, Will Heyniger, is going to help me explain why it happened, and, we're going to touch up on it and stuff and explore the awesome activity of meteorology.
For sure. It's a good thing.
Hell
so
yeah.
Where do you want to start?
So, where I want to start is pretty much like, so we know that it started in, the Arctic, hence Arctic Vortex. So like, I actually did see a video or on my weather app, like how they were talking about how it formed, which, sure. So like, if you could like kind of explain that more, like I'll just kind of say what they told me, and then we could kind of just, build off
sure.
of that. So what they were telling me was that like, from the jet stream and everything going across, it was just pretty much just causing a whole, circular pattern in the Arctic. And I mean, I'm not sure if there was another, jet stream going the other way, causing the whole circular motion, but that's pretty much what they told me, and then they kind of just carried over. So please explain more.
So what the media's latched onto is a term called the polar vortex. Okay, and it's become sexy in the last several years. But when we look at a globe of the Earth, we've got layers of the atmosphere.
Right.
Okay, and we have the troposphere, which is the layer most closest to the Earth, and then we've got winds up in the stratosphere. And what we've discovered, or not me, but smart people, is that there are influences up in the higher layers of the atmosphere, called the stratosphere, connected to things down in the troposphere. And it's part of the overall entire atmospheric layer. We're most familiar with the troposphere. That's our sensible weather that we experience, including this polar vortex. But the way I understand it is that the tropospheric layer and the stratospheric layer, they have a relationship where they kind of react to influences. And what I understand is that when the stratosphere warms, it changes somewhat the temperatures in the tropospheric temperatures.
Okay.
So one layer is high up, one layer is lower down. And we're discovering that there's all these interconnected systems. So what happens up here produces a response down here.
Okay.
And so when they see this thing called warming, it changes the temperature of the tropospheric layer, which impacts our sensible weather. And this warming up high produces a cooling. And so cold air builds over time in the high latitudes near the polar regions or the Arctic regions. That's tied into the jet streams that you mentioned, how air circulates. And so these changes causes an impact where this cold air that's over Siberia, northern Russia, and the Arctic regions, and I'm going to remove the stratosphere, we're going to work just with what's close to the Earth, allows this cold air to build in coverage. When I say build or strengthen, I mean get colder or more expansive in its aerial coverage. And every so often, the jet stream that steers storms around the globe, okay, about 18 to 20,000, 25,000 feet, takes a dip. And that jet stream comes from Canada and it starts to dip, allowing this cold air essentially to spill southward over the United States or any region of the planet. If this happened out in the Atlantic, nobody would care because nothing's really impacted there.
Right.
It would produce a different result over continental areas, but since it's happening over America, this dip essentially is allowing cold air to spill southward. And so this cold air, since it's happening over humans, all of a sudden it's very interesting or topical. And so you get this incredibly cold air because the nights are very long and they've been for a while every year up in the high latitudes. And we lose heat, that cold air spills down into the States and we get these severe outbreaks. Now, yes, Arctic air is not new. We've had these cold outbreaks before, but with the advent of abilities to transmit that information more rapidly and expansively, we can hear about it more quickly. So yes, Dallas has been cold before. This morning it got down as of Tuesday the 16th down to -1. But it's been colder through its history for record lows of even -8 or 12 or 15 degrees or something. So it wasn't the all-time, but it was certainly very cold. The duration has a lot to do with it, but it's not unheard of. And coming from a meteorologist, you would think climate change. I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but people shouldn't be so shocked. What it's exposing is our frail abilities to deal with it. The weather's just the weather. It's how we're prepared for it and acclimated to it. Dallas was colder than New Jersey Tuesday, February 16th. So this polar vortex has outbreaks. It happens over Europe. It happens over the ocean. But I can guarantee you this, and this is where we have to open our mind. Where there's cold air spilling down through the States, somewhere warm air is being allowed to move northward because the Earth is always in search of balance. Alaska warming up sometimes. Someplace on this planet is warm because warm air has been allowed to move northward while cold air somewhere else has been allowed to move southward. So it's this yin and yang struggle, which is, the concept of weather, how it always changes. Now, the magnitude of this, okay, that's factor one. The duration could be another result of overall climate change patterns. But to call one event a massive intrusion of climate change, that's not what climate change is about. It's death by 1,000 cuts. So these small changes that majority of scientists agree are occurring, if we had 2 or 3 outbreaks, that would get my really big interest. But one big outbreak, yes, it's impactful. Texas is freezing. All the political fallout, all the societal fallout. There have been, people that have succumbed to the cold is still very a huge thing to discuss.
Right.
But cold happens, and we have to accept that. For a week, okay, it gets worrisome and tiresome. And, Texas and cold air streaming into the Gulf of Mexico, not unheard of, but since it doesn't happen, people's memories tend to be short. But people are taking note, okay, what's the cause and effect of this outbreak? But we've had cold weather before. It's just that it's all relative to the world of Ted and Will in the terms of it happening and being noticed. If it happened 80 years ago, it would have taken weeks, or 100 years ago, rather, 1920, it would have taken several days to be disseminated informationally across the nation and across the planet. Okay, so maybe cold is a good thing because it does have benefits for the environment. Okay, but cold air streaming into the Gulf of Mexico of this magnitude is certainly noteworthy and topical, but it allows that cold air to be released. It won't last forever. It'll relax its grip and we'll go on with our seasonality, if you will. But if it does spur any conversation about changing and hardening or adapting our infrastructure, power-wise, transportation-wise, and our expectations of those things, that's certainly a good thing. So this weather is not profound, long-lasting, but global climate change, this could be an influencing contributor, or no, not a contributor, but a factor, but also a resultant, but also a piece of the puzzle that if it happens again next year and the year after, that would get my attention.
Oh, like if the frequency of this event happens more and more, then it's like, okay, like what the hell is going on now? Like why?
Sure.
Yeah.
But people in Montana are going, really? Please, Texas? Okay, it's a shock. But it's like, that's the way winters are supposed to be cold. Maybe not this cold. Okay. But we've had years where there's been storm after storm after storm. I could call in the 90s. We had snow every week for about 4 or 5 weeks. Every 5 to 6 days. It's just an active weather pattern. That's what it is. But the cognizance of that it could be a indicator is a good one of climate change is certainly going to go down in the records of history of, okay, nature's knocking on our door, like, hello, take notice of this, because there's certainly not good inputs from anthropogenically caused or influenced atmospheric recipe changing or alterations. So the cold air, it's cold air. Okay, some of the coldest we've seen in a long time. But Dallas has been colder if you're going to call spade a spade at the end of the day.
Good to know.
Yeah. So it's just an active weather pattern, and this is what the atmosphere does when it has a lot of energy. And right now it's very active and very energized. It's the Earth trying to find balance. But I'm guaranteed if you go somewhere, and I'll take a quick look while we talk, that I can guarantee you dollars to donuts, it's warm somewhere on this planet for sure.
Well, going off of that part really quick. So you explaining the troposphere, stratosphere, how if one's pretty much warm, the other one's going to be relatively cold just because of the interaction, and that causing the cold to really just
southward,
go southward into the states. But the one thing that kind of caught my attention was that since that the cold, as you said, is spilling into the states, but to replace that would be warm air, wouldn't that still be bad for the poles as well?
Yeah, and it's a matter of the magnitude of these swings. Right now, over parts of central, north of India into the Eurasian continent, the jet stream is farther north. Okay. Overall, yes, the Earth is heating up. I will definitely agree to that. But we've had warm days in January. We've had January thaw days before in our history in our local region. But yes, if it becomes a long term, but the wisdom is to say, hey, this is kind of doesn't seem normal, but let's define what normal is or how out of the normal this event actually is.
Okay.
To assess it fairly. Okay. One winter does not make climate, but this is a pretty big shock. During the summer, okay, no one's been talking about years past when Alaska's been very warm. Okay, so in all these little pieces, that's the climate puzzle that some don't want to accept or acknowledge or rectify with and come to terms with about, what's the 1,000 little cuts that should be telling you, hey, the Earth is kind of sick, we need to fix this. So if a good thing comes out that people are more aware and change their behavior to reduce climate change, I'm all for it. But cold has happened before in America.
So it's not necessarily like, oh my God, this is like, we have to do something about this. Like it's not really, I don't want to say urgent, but like it's not like, attention getter status. It's not like, hey, like this is bad, like let's do something about it. It's kind of like relatively normal-ish.
I bet you dollars to donuts if this cold outbreak had happened over the Pacific, you wouldn't hear a peep about it. It'd be very warm there. That would be the story, maybe the above normal warmth. But are these swings getting larger? The Earth's climate is a pendulum, a very slow rotating pendulum. And the Earth naturally swings. Okay, I'll admit it. The global climate change, it's not global warming, global cooling anymore. It's global climate change. So when that pendulum swings, are we influencing so the swings become farther to the warmer cold and vice versa? Is that outside of its normal oscillation of climate, what we define as climate? But are these swings getting bigger or more pronounced, leading to these cold air outbreaks or these warming events, and do they last longer?
Okay, so what you're pretty much saying is like, are like out of say if like the swinging pendulum is in this range, right? Exactly, in this range. Yeah, and if it's like going more to the extreme side, left or right, is it like, should it be alarming or should it be like it's done this before, it's not totally like something we should be very concerned about, but it's there.
It's there, and is this cold a push of the pendulum farther into the cold
Right.
over more parts of the planet? Okay, that's the $1 million question. My feeling, personally, disclaimer here, is that we do influence climate because the Earth's atmosphere is a recipe, and we're adding things to the recipe to take the sweet flavor away. Maybe we're adding too much salt. And like a recipe, if you add too much salt, you may think it's innocently enough while you're making the recipe, but the final product is definitely altered at the end. So we have to decide as a society, are we adding too much ingredient, greenhouse gases? What results does that produce? And we're doing it while we're living the experiment. As scientists, we want to conduct the experiment and just snapshot it and say, that's our experiment. What do we get out of that? But we're also living it at the same time. So that's why we're our own worst enemies in terms of the species, is that we're like, okay, let's live the life. And then whatever happens, happens. But, people are like, well, we partied good, but this is the end result, or the new result, I should say. And so the recipe, the recipe of the atmosphere is being changed. Can humans adapt? Do they want to adapt? And do they want to change that behavior?
Those are really like $1 million questions.
It's a big series of questions, and we have to decide, okay, maybe the pandemic has changed business travel, which is a big component of carbon footprint for people. Or do we go back to trains, which are more efficient? And how can we do that? I'd love to go on the next vacation as well. How do I, undo that sin? Maybe a carbon tax isn't the worst idea if it goes to the right endeavors. If my vacation, if I had to pay a little more for the carbon input, the true cost analysis of those the consequences of those actions, is it something is it worthy to me to pay? And that pendulum swing, is that outside of humans' tolerances of what we define as normal? Snowfall when you were a kid seemed deeper because you were shorter. So we have to be fair in our assessment too. Is that Dallas was colder in the past, and is this so abnormally bad, or is it just nature being nature? And I mean, as a scientist, I'm conflicted all the time with that. Okay, I think I know, because how many kangaroos and raccoons and cats and dogs do you see flying planes or building planes? It's all human forced, but does that force push the pendulum farther so people can adapt? Is that out of the realm?
Okay.
So we're living the experiment while we're doing it. The experiment is life, human life, but we're not. But we're contributing to the changing variables of the experiment.
So like that like, so when you say it like that, it seems like it's like a never-ending experiment that we won't actually get the results of until it's like either very late, like too late, or it's like flip of a coin. I have no fucking idea. Like,
Right. Like if you want to start a family someday, what do you don't think about that now. You're thinking about that when it happens. Okay. And that's what people do. They live in the now mostly. I mean, we were talking earlier off air about finances. Are you really properly preparing for your future? Probably not, because you'll think about it tomorrow. And, the earth doesn't think of it that way. We're just a extinctable species, because, if we die, the earth's going to keep going. Okay,
Well,
it doesn't. We need the Earth, and people need to realize that versus the Earth needing us. The Earth just treats us like carbon. We're just when we die, we go back into the periodic table. Doesn't care.
yeah, that's very actually. You bring up a good point. Of so like it's a short story. So like just to go off of what you were just saying, like we're part of the if I die tomorrow, like the world is still gonna go on. Like when I was working at my couple jobs previously, I was knocking on doors and stuff for a nonprofit organization, and I've run into so many people that are like, who cares about the environment? Like, I'm gonna be dead anyway, whatever. And then you have people that are complete opposite. So it's like, how? Sometimes I wonder, it's like, how do you kind of reach out to those kind of people, or even kind of. Just
You have to personalize it. You have to somehow make the connection that it does impact them. And any cognizant person would say, "Oh, I have grandkids. Maybe we have to go back to more spirituality where we are just visitors." Native American tribes and other cultures that said we're just visitors. We need to respect, and human Anglo-American arrogance, especially. Okay, focusing on America because other countries are different. But humans in general don't think tomorrow or, how do you reach out to the socially and economically challenged where they're just trying to survive. Yeah. They're just trying to survive and they don't worry about because they don't know where their food or their next paycheck is coming from. So who's it up to then? White males like ourselves that want to fall into a certain social category where we could be institutes for change? I'd like to think so. If I can make it better for some other, say, American worker, and reduce my footprint and pay a little more because I can, whose responsibility does it fall? Whose shoulders does it fall onto to be responsible? And I like to think that I can influence if I can pay a little more for socks, and they're not transported as far. They use at least American products, whatever that definition is anymore, and someone can get a livable wage. Maybe that'll afford them to think a little bit differently. It's very complicated and interwoven. There's no one answer, but we have to have the steadfastness to say, okay, this is what's going on. Do we agree? And we haven't seen that in America, in a while. People were buying World War War because it impacted them. Their kids were being shipped off to war, and there was this collective goodness. But other social classes may have not felt the same way. So we have to think about who's your audience and how do you get them to change. If we get local gardens going for economically and urban areas or even suburban areas that have food insecurities, that endeavor of a local garden and converting in a good way an unproductive lot, which still has an ecosystem, okay, it's just undeveloped or reclaiming it by weeds growing and so forth. If that could be a good impetus for them changing the inputs of climate by growing green things in a vacant lot, that could be their contribution. And getting food security and restoring social fabrics. Are they out buying Teslas? Maybe not. Everyone in the urban area is going to buy Teslas, but maybe I started by buying a Prius, a used Prius, so they didn't have to buy a new one. It was still a perfectly good car. I just bought new, and maybe that's my contribution. Each person has to find their own contribution. Maybe if you go check the waves, you bike up next time versus getting in your car like we all default to doing.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I normally when I go up to, I'm not like setting the record or anything, but like, since I live so close to the beach, I normally walk up to the beach or ride my bike, either one. And normally I just walk because I like to enjoy the scenery. Which is
maybe if you pick up your 4-pack, you make it efficient by stopping there on your way home instead of making 2 separate trips, then you proceed home. But there's very, very useful steps that every person can do to contribute. It's just about how do you get them on board, and that's the hard socio kind of nebulous that's hard to unravel. Some people just don't give a fuck, and you gotta.
Yeah, there are some people that are like that, and I ran into plenty of them. And I also, it's funny because it's like I ran into those kind of people that just didn't give a flying fuck, pardon our language, but they didn't. And then there was also people that are like, oh my God, how do I get involved like right now? But it's crazy though. Cause it's literally, just like this whole pandemic, there's people of all different parts of the spectrum on how they feel, and if they're scared of it, if they're not, whatever, like however they feel. And
It
it's
don't
like
really change until it impacts them. And there's bonuses and there's tragedies in that same statement. They don't change until it impacts them directly. And, how do you get to that point? Like, you got to go nuclear on them so they understand it finally. But that's also a sign of wisdom and not intelligence, but wisdom and being able to see things, but also believing in them in the sense that, okay, it affected this person, maybe will affect me as well. And it's complicated. It's not easy.
Oh, it's definitely not like a, concrete solution. It's not like, you hit this, you go to, it's not like a flow chart or anything, but it's definitely, you have to brainstorm ways. So.
For sure.
But, well, thanks for that. Thanks for the short meteorology lesson.
I hope it answered the question about the polar vortex at least, and then we can get into nuances of other features. But I think that's another podcast.
Yeah, that could be trust me, with some of the things that we just threw out there and discussed, that could go on for another like 3 hours, which I don't think any of my viewers have, let alone me. So
yeah.
So I'm cool with what we have right now, but real quick, we're gonna actually take another short break, and then I'm going to be talking to Will about how, like, what we've been talking about means to you, meaning the word sustainability. So tune into that. Keep it locked. We'll see you in a few minutes. Skittish. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching The Drink Sustainability.
Warning. As you watch the show, be sure to clink at your own risk. Drinks may not appear the way that they seem.